You are listening to Arabic Qahwa, the Classical Arabic Learners Podcast.
ومن ينفق الساعات في جمع ماله مخافة فقر فالذي فعل الفقر.
وإذا ظلمت فإن ظلمي باسل مر مذاقته كطعم العلقم.
ألم تعلمي أني إذا الضيف نابني وعز القرى أقري السديف المسرهدة.
This podcast is brought to you by fluentarabic.net. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm your host Abdourahmane and welcome to the very first episode of the Arabic Qahwa podcast. This is where we discuss all things about classical Arabic learning. And joining us here we have my very good friend Sheikh Abdourahmane Diallo. Sheikh Abdourahmane is currently pursuing his PhD from the Islamic University of Malaysia in Islamic jurisprudence. Before that, he completed his master's in economics. And Sheikh Abdourahmane, he is my teacher as well as my friend. He is the kind of guy who reads Arabic poetry in the middle of his sleep. Someone who is very much in love with Arabic literature and Arabic books and reading in general. Someone we can benefit a lot from. And thank you so much, Sheikh Abdourahmane, for agreeing to host this podcast with me. And we're excited to have you. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. Jazakallah khair.
I just want to get this off my chest. When someone asks me a question in I'rab or Arabic grammar, I just ask Sheikh Abdourahmane and then I pretend to know the answer. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. That is what is really going on.
That's just the Sheikh humbling himself. It's more like sharing ideas rather than a relation of teacher and students. It's more like a colleague who share ideas.
So for the first podcast, I wanted to choose a topic that is very important to all of us. As Arabic learners, as learners of Quranic Arabic, people who learn Arabic to understand the Quran and the Hadith and the Islamic texts, I assume that memorizing the Quran is something that we are all interested in doing. But what a lot of people don't realize is that memorizing the Quran and mastering the Arabic language have a huge correlation. What I mean is, people who actively memorize the Quran and also learn Arabic, it's so often that we find that their level of Arabic is much, much higher than those who do not memorize the Quran actively. And we have seen this so many times. People who have a very good hifz of the Quran, if they are students of the Arabic language, they are able to speak Arabic so beautifully, and they have a high level of mastery over the Arabic language. And we would love to know your insights on this, Sheikh Abdourahmane.
I think that's absolutely correct. Because if you think about it, the Quran is a masterpiece of eloquence. Its style, its structure, the choice of the words, it's so it's no wonder if someone reads the Quran and memorize it and familiar himself with it, that would lead him to have a certain level of mastery of the language. Because if he repeats the page many times, that would definitely affect the way he speaks Arabic. It would elevate his mastery of the language, because to memorize a page from the Quran requires repetition, a minimum repetition of 20 times or even more. So this would definitely affect the way you speak and it will improve your mastery of the language. So I think this is very evident, and it's proven. The people who memorize the Quran and the Sani tend to have a very high level of mastery of the language if they uh, put effort on it and trying to understand it. So it will definitely affect positively their mastery of the language.
No. The way I understand it is the Quran, when you memorize, like you said, you repeat the ayat so many times, like at least 20 times, I think at least 100 times, with the revision and all that. So you are memorizing the arrangement of words. You are memorizing these sentences. You are imprinting this sentence structure into your brain. And this is not any simple speech. This is the most eloquent, most beautiful speech. This is the Kitabullah, like Abdourahmane said. So you are repeating and memorizing, you're taking it into your heart, these beautiful words and how they are arranged. So on a subconscious level, you're attaining this kind of fluency because you're learning from this speech, you're learning from this pattern by repetition. And even the i'rab, because to speak with the correct i'rab in Arabic, it requires so much practice. But when you memorize the Quran, you're memorizing the sentences with the correct i'rab and you're repeating it so many times. So I think this is something that will help you to speak with the correct i'rab. People who memorize the Quran, they will find it much easier to speak Arabic with the correct i'rab. Do you think that, Abdurrahman?
Since most of the rules of Arab is taken from the Quran, so the standard grammar, it's the one we have in the Quran. And the standard Arabic, it's the Quranic Arabic. Because if you look at the pre-Islamic poetry, you can find many words that are no longer used in the books or in the standard Arabic writing. So the words and the structure that the Quran use is the one that survived, that's prevailed. So that's what become the standard Arabic. So if you read the Quran, that would definitely give you the the ability to understand the grammar and to allow you to speak with the right Arab and to have the right style and the right way of speaking the language.
Yeah, and it will take your Arabic to an entirely new level because that is the level of fluence, the level of eloquence of the Quran.
Yeah, this just remind me one of the great scholars, faqih and muhaddith called Imam al-Khattabi. He said something that I find is very profound. He said, if you look at the Quran, every word is chosen carefully and it's masterfully put in that in the structure, and no other word can replace it and maintain the same accuracy and the beauty of the language. In the Arabic language has many synonyms, so each word may have many synonyms. So he said, but every word is carefully chosen that no other word can replace it and still retain the same meaning and the same accuracy. So, and if you really learn this and familiarize yourself with that kind of style and that kind of accuracy, that would definitely make a difference in your mastery of the language.
Subhanallah, that is so true. And memorizing the Quran in general, it is one of the most beneficial things you can do in this dunya. And there are so many hadiths talking about the fadl, about the benefits of memorizing the Quran. And maybe Sheikh Abdourahmane, he can remind us about a few of the hadiths. But I just want to share this personal experience that I have with memorizing the Quran. What I noticed is that, I try to read fiqh, I try to read other Islamic books, I try to learn hadith. But what I found is that when I sit down to memorize the Quran, that is the time when shaitan works the hardest to try and stop me from memorizing the Quran. That is the time when I find so many distractions. Sometimes shaitan, he tries to make you do something good to stop you from doing something that is better. What I mean is, sometimes he tries to make you read fiqh or hadith to stop you from memorizing the Quran. That is how beneficial memorizing the Quran is. Maybe because you memorize the Quran when you're young, maybe you don't know how this feels like. But I find, so many times when I sit down to memorize the Quran, I find so many distractions, but maybe this is the secret behind the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us that every time you read the Quran, you begin by seeking refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And
إذا قرأت القرآن فاستعذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
So this
I
is
think there's Imam Shatibi, the author of حرز الأماني وجه التهاني, the great book of علم القراءات. In his introduction, he said some poetry lines that I find very beautiful. He said, وَإِنَّ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ أَوْثَقُ شَافِعٍ وَأَغْنَى غَنَاءً وَاهِبًا مُتَفَضِّلًا وَخَيْرُ جَلِيسٍ لَا يُمَلُّ سَمَاعُهُ وَتَرْدَادُهُ يَزْدَادُ فِيهِ تَجَمُّلًا. He said, the Quran, خَيْرُ جَلِيس, the best interlocutor. It's like the best thing that you would spend your time with. لا يمل سماعه. You will never get bored of it. Like you can repeat it 100 times or 1,000 times, but each time you read it, it feels like you're reading it the first time. If you ponder and contemplate on it, it gives you the freshness and the beauty of reading it the first time. Say وَتَرْدَادُهُ يَزْدَادُ فِيهِ تَجَمُّلًا. So the more you repeat it, the more it adorn you, it embellish you, it beautify your soul and beautify your character.
The more you read it, the more beautiful it becomes.
The more beautiful it sounds, the more beautiful it became. So this is the Quran, and I find these lines of his introduction really very beautiful, and I think everyone should read these lines because it gives you the drive and it really motivates you to read the Quran and to memorize the Quran.
You want to mention the name of the book once more?
It's just usually they call it Matn al-Shatibiyya, but it's the full name is حرز الأماني وجه التهاني. But if you say Matn al-Shatibiyya, everyone knows it. Or if you write it on the internet, you'll find it.
And now I want to talk about a few ways to memorize the Quran, because there are so many different methodologies people use to memorize the Quran, and we want to look at what are the best strategies or the best techniques that we can use to memorize the Quran. Because Brother Abdourahmane, mashallah, I found that his hips is very solid. Because I just remember an incident back when we were in university. We went to an Islamic lecture, and it was about to begin, and they couldn't find the Qari. So they came to Abdourahmane and they asked him, can you just do the opening qiraat? So Abdourahmane said, okay, and he just went on stage and he just started reading from the middle of the Quran. So, I found this amazing, to be honest, because if I read from the middle of the Quran, somewhere I memorized in front of 5 people, I'm going to make at least 5 mistakes, subhanAllah. So, mashallah, I can see that your hips is very strong. And so we just want to look at some of the ways that you've been using to memorize the Quran. Maybe you can share with us, what is your best advice when it comes to memorizing the Quran?
Yeah, I think it's very important when you're trying to memorize the Quran to do it the proper way and follow the proper methods. Because many people, they memorize Quran at certain time, but after a few months, if you ask them about what they memorized, they've already forgotten everything. So it's very important that you follow the right and a good method in memorizing the Quran. And here I'll just try to suggest some methods or some advice for you to help you memorize the Quran and to have a solid and strong memorization. So the first thing I advise anyone who would like to memorize the Quran is to try to find a teacher, to try to find someone who would guide you and teach you. And nowadays it's very easy. If you don't have it in your area or your place, you can always find some websites in the internet that would help you and would provide you a teacher who would guide you in your memorization of the Quran. So the first thing you should do before memorizing anything, if you want to memorize, let's say, a page from the Quran, so the first thing you should do is try to correct the recitation of that page. So you go to the Shaykh and you can either repeat after him or you can read, and if you make any mistake, he will correct you. So I think this is the first step, because if you memorize it with mistakes, it would stay that way. So even though you memorize the Quran, but you'll still read it in the wrong way. So the first thing is to correct the portion or the page that you want to memorize. So this is the first thing. The second thing is if you take a lesson or a portion, let's say a page, it's better to divide it into different parts. Let's say 3 parts, for example, and don't try to memorize all of it at once, because it will be very difficult. It would be easier if you divide it into different portions and then memorize one after another. So after that, you try to combine the whole portion of the whole page and repeat it as many times, as much as you can. So the more you repeat, the better. The more you repeat, the stronger your memorization will be. So the key thing about memorization is repetition. The more you repeat, the better. And the fourth thing that many people neglect, which is very essential, is revision. So it doesn't mean that you just memorize something today, that that is it. Rather, you have to revise it. So usually the first thing you do the next day before taking any new lesson or any new part is to revise the one you memorize the day before. And after that also the whole parts that you memorized the last week. So you should do this every day. Before taking any new part, you should revise the parts you memorized the last week. And then you should also have another revision for the previous memorization, the previous parts memorized before. So let's say in every 2 weeks or in every week, you should revise everything that you memorize from the Quran. So in this way, you will have a solid memorization and you can maintain it for a long time, and it will require very minimum effort in order for you to maintain your memorization.
Okay, so let me just see if I got all of that. The first step is to have your recitation corrected to make sure there are no mistakes.
Yes.
The second step is to divide the part into smaller parts. So if you take a page, divide it into 3 different parts. The third step is to repeat it many times
Yes.
to fortify the hips. And the final stage is to revise what you have memorized.
Exactly. I think these steps, if you follow them, inshallah, you will see the result.
Bi-idhnillah.
Inshallah.
So I just remembered when you were talking about these things. There was this scholar. He used to repeat things so many times. When he wanted to memorize something, he would just keep on repeating it hundreds of times, to the point where his servant got annoyed. So she came up to him and she said, "What is wrong with you? Haven't you memorized this yet after repeating it so many times? Even I have memorized it." And she read the thing that he was trying to memorize to him. So he kept silent. And after many days, the sheikh, he asked the servant to repeat what she had read once more. And this time, she could not repeat it. And the sheikh, he still remembered. So this is something very important. When you memorize something, you will think that you have it in your memory. This is actually in your short-term memory, and you're going to forget it after a while. But if you repeat it enough times, this is going to be shifted into your long-term memory, and that is the hifz that is going to stay with you. So even after you got the part into your heart, you need to repeat it again and again in order to make that long-term memory and to make sure you memorized it very strongly. So that is one thing. And the second thing about revision, that is also something very important, because I think a lot of people misunderstand when you say memorize the Quran, hafiz of the Quran, because I've seen so many people, they claim to have memorized the Quran. What they mean is that they memorize the Quran once from cover to cover. They memorize every single page in the Quran, but they don't have the entire Quran in their heart. This is not what we mean by hafiz of the Quran. When an actual school of the Quran, or in the classical sense, when we say hafiz of the Quran, he is a person who has the entire Quran in his heart. When you go to a good school and when they have the graduation of a hafiz, there is a test. And in that test, they're going to test him from every part of the Quran. They're going to ask from anywhere in the Quran, and he should be able to answer. So he should have the entire Quran in his memory. This is the hifz of the Quran. But there are some other people, they just memorize the Quran once, and when they're memorizing one part, they've already forgotten the other part. This is not the real hifz of the Quran. And I've seen so many people, so many kids who have, they claim to memorize the Quran. Their teachers claim they have taught them the entire Quran. But just a few months after they have completed the Quran, they can't even read one page without mistakes. If it is, outside the last juz or the common surahs. So this is something we need to clarify. And so some very beneficial advice from Abdourahmane on memorizing the Quran. So now I just want to ask you, Abdourahmane, about your personal experience of memorizing the Quran. You told me you did this back in your country in Senegal. Is that true?
Yeah, the first half of the Quran, I actually memorized it, most of it, with my father, because he used to wake us up at for Fajr, and then from Fajr, before going to school, we would study for 1 to 2 hours, and then and at night also, if we came back from work, we usually start after Maghrib and we read for 2 hours before going to bed. And the weekends,
Subhanallah. So your father, he taught you half the Quran.
yeah, almost have the Quran, and part of it. Maybe once I went for for the summer holiday, so for 2 months, and but when I went back for a second time, it was just so exciting. I decided that I will just stay here and memorize the whole Quran, and then go back and resume my school.
In
So
the center for Hifz.
yeah, I went to a Tahfiz school. I was doing it for full time.
Okay.
So
So, mashallah, I just wanted to say, your father, mashallah, so he taught you half the Quran, and your brother as well, right?
yeah, the whole family, my brothers and everyone, will just wake up and study. That's what we do. The first thing we do is, after praying Fajr, we'll just meet at the living room, and we start reading Quran and memorizing Quran. So that was
Subhanallah, this is something so amazing. Like, we have people today, they just get up and they just start, thinking about the dunya. They get ready for work, and, after coming home from work, they just switch on the Netflix or whatever they watch on their TV or their phone. And, some of them, they neglect their kids. And even if they spend time with them, they're not teaching them the Quran, or they're not teaching them the deen. And mashallah, your father, subhanallah, what he's done, may Allah reward him. He taught, after a long day of work, he would come home and he would teach his children the Quran. That is so amazing, subhanallah. And the benefits, inshallah, he's going to find it in this dunya. Bidhnillah, he's going to find it in the qabr. May Allah, make it easy for him. May Allah make it from the gardens of paradise for him. And he's going to find it in the akhirah, inshallah. The amal that remains with a person after he dies, one of the things the Prophet ﷺ said, it is the dua of the son who is salih, the ibn salih. So inshallah, as long as you don't mess up Abdourahmane, he's going to benefit from you and your brother and your sisters. So mashallah, that is so inspiring. May Allah help all of us to teach our children the Quran, Arabic, and what benefits them. And so there you have it, some very beneficial advice on memorizing the Quran, and a very interesting story of how Abdourahmane memorized the Quran. And inshallah, we can all benefit from his experience and his advice. And I just want to leave you with this final advice, my dear brothers and sisters. If you are memorizing the Quran, the most important thing, I think, is that you never ever give up. Because, sometimes it becomes very frustrating. You try so hard, you revise again and again, and you still keep making mistakes. And I've heard so many teachers of the Quran say this: you never memorize the Quran, you never really memorize the Quran until you cry at least once from the qahr of trying to memorize the Quran, or the frustration of trying and forgetting. And I have heard so many people who have memorized the Quran say this. So this is something you find in your journey of memorizing the Quran. But the important thing is that you remember that you are memorizing the Quran to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not going to ask you how many juz you memorized or how many pages of the Quran you know by heart. He's going to look at the effort that you have put into memorizing the Quran. So work on perfecting your niyyah, be steadfast, and keep doing it, my dear brothers and sisters, and bi'idhnillah, you will get there. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us And with that, I leave you until next time. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.